All right, welcome to another edition of what I'm calling my Martial Arts series, because it's me sitting in a car talking about my favorite topic, martial arts, while I'm waiting to go in and train. So this one's going to be kind of a part two of what I started last week, which was talking about stance in relation to your opponent. And in the last week's, I talked about the advantages and disadvantage of having your strong side forward versus having your strong side back. And this time I want to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of matching leads with your opponent versus having an unmatched or a mirrored lead with your opponent. So matching leads means if your opponent has their left foot in front, you have your left foot in front. Okay? In boxing, they call that an orthodox stance because it's what most people have. It's just the orthodox. It's the way it's done. You have your left foot in front. An unmatched or a mirrored lead would be if one guy has their left foot in front, so you have your right foot in front. And so it's like looking at a mirrored image. Okay? In boxing, they call that a Southpaw stance because I guess Southpaw means weird and different, and so that's what that is. Now, there are three main points I want to make. Three main advantages, and we're really looking at the unmatched or the mirrored lead. Sometimes it's called an open lead because, well, it's hard to explain, but that's another thing it's called. Anyway, we're really looking at that because if you are both in matching leads, if you're in matching leads, you both have access to the same advantages, same disadvantages as each other. So it doesn't really change things. But if you're in unmatched leads, now every advantage that you have is also a disadvantage for them, and vice versa. If they have the advantage, then you have the disadvantage. So I'm going to kind of explain that in three parts. So we have three main advantages when you go unmatched leads or mirrored leads with somebody. And the first, the most important concept when it comes to unmatched leads is control over the front foot position. So if you imagine my front foot, actually my opponent's front foot and my front foot, if our feet are directly across from each other, we're kind of neutral. We're exactly the same. If I can get my foot just to the outside of their front foot, then I have access to all these different advantages that we're going to talk about. And then, of course, if he can get that front foot in, then he gets those advantages. So usually the battle of unmatched leads happens with where that front foot goes. Okay, who gets to control that position? And usually the advantage goes to the person with the Southpaw stance or the right lead, because again, left lead is orthodox. That is how most people are, and so that is most orthodox fighters train against other orthodox fighters. And so usually if someone's a Southpaw, someone fights with their right foot in front, they have seen a lot more of that unmatched lead or that mirrored lead than what an orthodox fighter would have. So usually the advantage goes to the person in the Southpaw stance, the person with their right leg in front. Now let's talk about the three advantages you have if you can get your front foot on the outside of their front foot. The first one is your lead side has less telegraph to make it to the target than their lead side. Okay, so if you imagine my entire body is somewhat to the side of their entire body. I don't know if that... So we started out here, I got front foot advantage. So that means that my front hand, my front arm, my front shoulder is slightly outside of their front shoulder. So if we both have our guard up like this, for me to hook my opponent, all I have to do is go straight out and then curve my arm in. It goes a straight line to my opponent and it hits them. It goes around their arm, okay? Their arm is on the inside of my front arm, so I can go almost straight and hook them. Whereas for them, because their arm's on the inside of mine, they now have to go around my arm to hit me. So they have to open up. They have to make this extra movement with their front arm. So that's the same with the jab. I can punch over their jab. So a lot of times a southpaw, what they'll do is they'll wait for their opponent to jab, and then they'll just fire a jab right over their jab. We call that cutting a punch, because your punch is going to just punch right over theirs. So your block becomes you hitting them with a jab. So you're combining that offense and defense just by jabbing. The moment they jab, you defend that jab by just punching right over their arm and knocking their arm out of the way. So you have more access to tools with the lead side of the body a lot quicker without having to open yourself up. The second thing, and this one, I can't, you have to see it, but the more that you angle to that outside, the further you take yourself away from their power side, which we're going to call that, even if they're left-handed and they have their left hand is stronger than their right, they're still going to be able to generate more power from whichever arm is back than they will with whatever arm is in front, because they can get their whole body mass behind it. And so we're going to call that their power side. The more, and that's the same with you as well, your back side will be your power side. You'll always be able to generate more power with that side no matter what. So the more that you can get that outside advantage, the closer you put your opponent to your power side, and at the same time, the more you move yourself away from their power side. Okay? So now there's a lot shorter distance for you to travel to land the type of blows that can knock people out with one shot. And the more distance you create, that they are going to, you'll see their punch coming a lot easier. And the easiest way maybe think about it is to really take it to an absurd range, and imagine if you somehow turned a full 90 degrees on the person, your hand is right there. Or if you stepped very far sideways, your hand is right by their chin, and their arm, they'd almost have to twist in a weird way to get you with that. Okay, so that helps you see. I mean, it's going to be really hard to get that good of a position on the person, but every inch counts. And then the third one is, if you look at a guard and you imagine there's a triangle right here, okay? It goes up and back down. Right here, there's this little gap of space where there's nothing there. And so when we're in Orthodox leads, if we both jab, that jab will naturally, if you just look at how your shoulders are lined up, that jab will naturally come through this space, but the cross will run into my front arm. Okay, if you just imagine like you're both in Orthodox leads and you both put your arms straight out in front of your shoulders, your jab hand is going to naturally be right in front of that space, but your cross hand is going to be against their forearm. So that means if that person did not move, you have a better chance of landing jabs, because you can punch through that space. Even if it's closed, it's still the weakest. You can punch hard enough to get through that space. So even if it's pretty close to each other, but if I don't move and you throw a cross, you run into my arm, and it's going to be pretty hard to punch through that. So naturally, my defense blocks those crosses, but there is a gap for that jab. On the other hand, if we go unmatched leads, now it becomes the opposite. Both of us have our strong side going down that hole right there. So that's where it becomes like, now if I can get that outside position, I now line my shoulder up with that hole even better. So now I can go straight down the pike and hit. And so if you watch a lot of unmatched lead fights, a lot of people fight in unmatched leads, you'll see it usually becomes the front hand is used more to just set up that rear hand, but like to an absurd. People throw the rear hand almost like they're throwing jabs. Like they just keep throwing them because that opening is right there. And if you get that outside foot position, it's going to be easier for you to send that rear hand down. So now all of a sudden that gap is an opening for your power side instead of just your jab. So it's going to be easier to knock somebody out if you can get that outside foot advantage. Maybe a fourth point related to that is your front hand is now right next to theirs. If you look, when you're in unmatched leads, your front hands can almost be touching each other. And you'll see people like Conor McGregor, who's a Southpaw, use that front hand to trap a lot. And that's the beautiful thing is now you're in unmatched leads, you can use that front hand to trap and open up lines for that rear hand to go down. So trapping becomes easier, as well as landing your power side shots become easier. Again, the key is who controls that outside foot position. But if you control that outside foot position, then landing power shots and trapping become a lot easier. So I guess there's 4 advantages there for you. But anyway, so that's kind of the advantages and disadvantages to matching versus unmatching leads. Cool.